Please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I'm surprised it's
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for being here tonight. We have a very special agenda item at the top of the agenda, which is the appointment of a lieutenant in the police department. As you know, we have a relatively small department, or maybe not even a relatively small department. We, typically only have one lieutenant. We have sometimes two when we're transitioning, but so it's not very often we actually appoint lieutenants. So this is a very special night. We'll start with the resolution, which is kind of the boring part, and then we'll go to the oath of office from there. But first, I also like to say that we had two great candidates for lieutenant. I think I saw Mike Foley come in, but Mike Foley and Frank Pignatelli, they're two great officers, and we're lucky to have both of them here in Irvington. I think we're all very excited to have Frank in the role, and we're very excited to have Mike Foley continuing his role as sergeant as well, because they're both great, dedicated, intelligent, hardworking officers for us. But without further ado, resolved to appoint Francis Pignatelli to the position of lieutenant at an annual salary of $145,499, effective February 4th, 2020, subject to a probationary period of not less than 12 weeks and not more than 50 weeks. I'll make the motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Frank, I'll ask you to come up towards the microphone and we can do the official oath of office there. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Francis Pignatelli,
I, Francis Pignatelli,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge
and that I will faithfully discharge
the duties of the office of Police Lieutenant
the duties of the office of Police Lieutenant
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Congratulations. You want to go? Sign it.
He's gonna want to come in.
I'll sign it right now.
You want to remove the sergeant?
In a few minutes.
All of them, or-
He's gonna want to get with
You can hold Nicholas and Monica Payne.
Yeah, that's great. It's a Christmas card. Congratulations.
Mama's house. Thank you.
Yes, members of the police department, meet us inside.
Thank you, guys.
For photo op.
Good night, everyone.
You mean we didn't
Mike, congratulations.
Hey, Mike.
Thank you.
Well, I cleaned it out. Oh, I got that one. Thank you.
Next up, we have announcements. I guess the one special announcement I have is that the Village of Irvington has been able to work to acquire 86 Main Street, which is the building that is directly to the west of the current firehouse. We have been looking at many different sites to try to figure out a way to somehow expand our firehouse so that it meets the modern codes. This building went on the market, I think it was in maybe October, November. We were negotiating in December to try to buy it in the open market, and we were successful. Our bid was accepted, and we're working towards closing that deal. It'll probably take several years to figure out exactly the uses and how we're going to do it, but we love the fact that we now have some options on how to get the firehouse up to code. And beyond that, we're going to continue to work on it. Until then, it will continue to operate as a multifamily house and a commercial building. But as we figure everything out, but we will obviously along the road at appropriate time have public comment about the uses of it as well. But we're excited to get that step, that very first important step for the fire department. You'll see. The reason I'm bringing it up is the first official thing on the announcements is checks over $25,000, and one of them is the deposit check. So, but first we had King's Capital Construction Group for the Riverview Road Booster Pump Station, which was out of the capital fund, and that was $102,837. Then we also had one for Imbanio and Quigley Landscape Architects for the Matson Park design. That was out of the capital fund as well, for $46,834.50. And then Shapiro, Gettner, Walding, and Monteleone LLP, which was the deposit on 86 Main Street out of the capital fund for $213,000. Next, we would like to schedule a budget workshop for February 12th, which is a Wednesday. It's our work session. That budget workshop will be for the library, theater, and DPW. On February 20th, which is a regular meeting, but it's on a Thursday because of President's Day, there's a budget workshop for the fire department and water and sewer departments. Then March 2nd, which is back to our regular Mondays, is a budget workshop for the recreation parks department and the building department. Does anyone else have any announcements? Otherwise, I'll move right on to correspondence, which we had one piece of correspondence from Ellen Hendricks and Councilwoman Lauren Leader. Dear mayors and supervisors, the shadow of the Holocaust looms large on this. This was from January 28, 2020. The shadow of the Holocaust looms large on this day after the 75th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, which coincided with Holocaust Memorial Day. You have all seen the alarming reports on the news of incidents of hate, specifically anti-Semitism, hitting very close to home. Monsey, Yorktown, Pleasantville, and the list goes on and on. I ask you today to stand with Westchester County government and put those who commit these heinous acts on notice that any acts of hate will not be tolerated, whether they're acts of anti-Semitism or another expression of hate towards others. Councilwoman Lauren Leader of Harrison has introduced a resolution of the Harrison Board condemning anti-Semitism, and it has passed unanimously. Since then, the boards in Rhyme, Mamaroneck, Bedford, Ardsley, Hastings-on-Hudson, and Dobbsbury have passed similar resolutions. Lauren and I, on behalf of the County Executive, George Latimer, ask you to do the same. We have attached a resolution that the County Executive just sent to the County Board of Legislators for passage. You're welcome to modify the wording and prepare your own. Please share your endorsed resolutions with us once passed. We will then gather together with one voice for all to hear, and we say, hate has no home in Westchester. Respectfully, Ellen Hendricks, Assistant Director of Intergovernmental Relations, and the Honorable Lauren Leader, Councilwoman, Town of Harrison. So,
Yes.
yeah, we very briefly discussed this online, via email, and I think we all want to sign off on this resolution.
I'd agree. Usually we're leading the way in these kinds of
Yeah.
resolutions. So it's
Well, I think it was more timing of our meeting.
I hope so.
But
But it's an important thing for
so maybe I'll go ahead and read the resolution.
Can we adopt it as it is, or do we have to wait for it to be?
I don't think there's actually, I mean, other than the therefore be it resolved.
And, yeah, you can substitute Irvington with,
Westchester County.
well, yeah, the other way around, Westchester County with Irvington, sure.
Yeah, I think the only other thing I saw was maybe we didn't need that last whereas, but I think it's fine because it's actually generically about Westchester County and what they've done, so we're happy to highlight their work as well. And let's check, make sure there's no other places we have to. So go ahead, start reading. Whereas our nation was founded on the principles of religious freedom and the right of all people to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And whereas contrary to those principles, there has been a significant increase of violent anti-Semitic attacks throughout the United States and particularly New York State's Hudson Valley region. And whereas the FBI notes that nationwide in 2014, 609 anti-Jewish hate crimes incidents were reported. By 2018, that number increased 40%. And whereas the FBI reports that nationally in 2018, there were 7,036 single bias-related incidents that involved 8,327 offenses. Of those, 59.5% stemmed from race, ethnicity, ancestry bias, 18.6 were motivated by religious bias, and 16.9 resulted from sexual orientation bias. Whereas according to the Anti-Defamation League, which tracks anti-Semitic and other hate incidents, reported that anti-Semitic incidents were at historic levels in the United States in 2018. Occurrences of assaults alone were up 105% from 2017 to 2018. And whereas the ADL stated that preliminary analysis of 2009 data shows that New York will have recorded the most anti-Jewish hate crimes since 1992. And whereas December 18, 2019, 5 people were tragically stabbed at a Hanukkah celebration in Monsey, New York, in neighboring Rockland County. And whereas here in 2019 in Westchester County, we were enraged and heartbroken that on the eve of Yom Kippur, the highest of holy days in the Jewish faith, anti-Semitic materials were discovered at our Holocaust Garden of Remembrance. And whereas Westchester County has a long history of standing up, speaking out, and protecting human rights, in 2000, the Westchester County Human Rights Commission was created to ensure that prejudice, intolerance, bigotry, and discrimination will not threaten the rights and privileges of its people, and that all are treated with dignity and respect, and is necessary to give effect to equal rights for all assured by the Constitution and the laws of the United States, New York State, and this county. Now therefore be it resolved that Irvington is appalled by the anti-Semitic attacks here at home and on our Rockland County neighbors. We stand in solidarity with the people of Yorktown and Monsey and in rejecting all forms of bigotry, hatred, or discrimination of any kind. And be it further resolved that hate will have no home in Irvington or Westchester County. We are committed to promote openness, inclusion, freedom, and mutual understanding by ensuring all people of Irvington, regardless of race, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin, or immigration status, may live free from violence, harassment, or prejudice. Our village will make every effort to ensure that our community is one where all people are welcome, included, and respected. And further be resolved to work with local communities, Westchester County, to hold public learning sessions for combating hate, to educate young people and the people at large about unity and acceptance through the Human Rights Commission work with the Westchester County community, as well as a whole to combat hate. And further be it resolved that Irvington will work with other levels of government and community groups to root out hate and promote understanding. We encourage other municipalities to join this resolution and to join forces in ensuring that the vile history of anti-Semitism and other forms of intolerance in New York and around the world ends now and ends here. And be it further resolved that a certified copy of this resolution shall be forwarded to Westchester County and all those deemed necessary and proper so the intent of our county elected leaders and Irvington is widely known. So I'll make a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor? Larry, you can clean it up this side.
Oh, no, I got it. Thank you.
So now we will open up to public comment about anything not on the agenda. Otherwise, I will move to the consent agenda. Anyone have any questions or comments on the consent agenda? Otherwise, I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. If I can get a second.
Second.
All in favor? Carried. Next, I will make a motion to open a public hearing to consider a local law amending the zoning code to permit parking structures in existing buildings in the business district. If I can get a second. All in favor? Public hearing is now open. Mary Ann, did you want to walk us through?
The short version is this local law permits parking structures in existing buildings in the business district, but not buildings bordering Main Street or North Astor. It involves several changes to the code. Okay, the first change is to the list of permitted uses in the business district, and I'll read what that is. It'll be section 20, in buildings already in existence on January 1st, 2020, parking structures, provided that the following additional requirements are met. A, the building in which the parking structure is located does not border either Main Street or North Astor Street. B, the parking structure is subject to site development plan review under Article 14 of the zoning code. The second part of it is to amend the section of the business district regulations that provides that all permitted uses in the district must be carried on in buildings fully enclosed on all sides to make an exception for parking structures which might well not be fully enclosed on all sides. So the exception is just for parking structures permitted by this section. Then the third is to amend provisions in two sections of the zoning code. There's two sections of the zoning code, one in the business and the parking regulations that say decks and elevated parking structures or any variation thereof are prohibited, and there's an exception inserted for parking structures permitted by the new section 20 that I just dropped. And then the final change is to the site plan section of the zoning code. It lists when site plan review is required, and this is added, the conversion of any building or part of the building to a permitted parking structure. That's it, Ron.
Okay. Obviously, this was a proposal that came from the property owner, an idea that came from the property owner. It addresses a long-term request for additional parking that had received quite a backlash from local neighbors. One of those neighbors actually had a similar idea for parking, so I'm glad to see that we kind of come to they came to the same conclusion almost. I think too that the outright ban on parking structures was the result of a proposal that faced a large backlash. I think not because it was necessarily parking structures, but because it was was perceived as blocking views of the Hudson River. And now that is probably that was at least 12 years ago, I'd say, maybe 15 years ago that all started. At least I know it was a heavy topic when I first got on the board, and we were never able to resolve it. So I don't think that there's a anti-parking structure bias in this village. I think it was really for one particular parking structure, and that was the way that the village board at the time ensured that project could move forward. So I think that's where we are. We'd love to hear some of the...
It might just also be worth pointing out that there are not a whole lot of buildings that this could happen into, because it's only the business district, and it can't be anything that has a border on Main Street. It can't be anything that has a border on North Astor. So there's a limited number of buildings.
And it's also existing buildings, which
and it has to be existing. That's why
the
it
previous
says
one was a new structure.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's a lot of background. We have not received a lot of feedback in advance, so I'm hoping that some people tonight will want to talk about this. So, let's set if anyone on the board wants to say anything.
Well, I might have been zoned out, but I don't know if we clearly stated that part of this is a solution for parking for the Trent Building complex. And
Yeah.
I don't know if that was said or not. That's sort of.
I said it in a much longer way.
You say the T word.
And it would be located in the gray building, which is down near the Metro North parking area. So just want to be clear of that so that anyone who's listening knows.
It's in the Hudson Loft would be the top floor of the building.
Right.
Happy to open it up. If anyone would like to speak, or please.
Hi, Monica Richmond. I live on North Buckout Street. Thank you. I actually have been here I have been here at other times that parking structures have been mentioned since 2008, so more in the last 10 years. And there was quite a vocal outcry. A lot of it had to do, was going to be closer maybe to the river, but it was also because of the light pollution, and that's not going to change. The problem when you do a parking structure is the nature of safety, and you need light. And even if you enclose it, there's going to be windows and there's going to be light, and they have to be late at night, and especially the places that you're talking about. So I would like to just go on record as saying that I still object to it. I still hope it's not done, and that there was a lot of people at the time that were here that came one after another talking about that they didn't want parking structures in the town. So I don't know if that has changed, but this was within the last 10 years, and it was pretty vehement. And that was one of the things, is it does create light pollution.
Which want to talk about, a little bit about the dark sky?
Well, I mean, we do have now the regulation we passed for dark sky lighting, which is really about glare and lighting extending out beyond property lines. So, you know, any buildings that are going, especially this kind of a project, would have to conform to those kind of regulations, which would cut light bleed down from the building itself. The other thing I wanted to point out, I thought was interesting, was when we did the comprehensive plan update, 2018, there was pretty much universal support for the notion that that a parking structure was probably going to be needed somewhere down near the base of Main Street, and the area people kept talking about it was DPW location because of the hillside and the natural topography. No one in the community that was involved in that process thought, there were quite a few people involved in that process, no one thought that there should be anything, you know, in the waterfront district, which was where the other building back then was proposed. So the one thing going for this is, one thing going, but you know, it's an existing structure and it's up against kind of the equivalent to the Palisade Rise that's on the east side.
Are you talking about the DPW building?
No, I'm talking
specifically?
about now, the location we're talking about is the gray building.
The one on the hill where the...
No, down at the parking, the Hudson Gray building is a smaller rectangular three-story building that's down right,
Adjacent to the Metro North parking lot, but
yeah. So it's down the hill
south
from
of
the
the
Trent
parking
building
lot.
itself, it's that next.
All right, I'm
next
honestly
building.
not sure which building it is, so I'm not going to
Yeah.
pretend to remember. I walk it all the time. I'm sure I just haven't realized
Yeah,
it.
it's sort of an unassuming building.
Well, non-assuming is good. I have two issues. One, and I remember somebody specifically saying this when this came up a few years ago, said if you let the nose of the camel in under the tent, it's just, you can't pull it back. And there was a lot of concern. If that concern by the whole town is alleviated, I'm just one person's voice. I still find it very disconcerting to have parking structures for a gazillion reasons, of which I'm sure quite a few of you have studied. You have the lights, you have the safety, you have the more traffic. And I get it with Metro North that there has to be something, but I'm not sure this is the resolution. And if it's specifically for one location in town, rather than amending the whole code, why wouldn't we just make perhaps an exception for one building? If it's really one building that is the agreed upon, rather than create something that allows other people to come, or allows other areas to be considered. And with that, I don't want to create a debate with one person who doesn't know enough. But that would be like my as an attorney as well, that would be my gut instinct, would be to find, if it's going to be that one and everybody agrees that's part of the town management, then make the exception for that one building. Don't make it a change in the code that allows other people to get in. Thank you.
Anybody else? Please.
Yeah, Will Reale, I just want to go on record as agreeing with Ms. Richmond. It seems to me that one variance is not something that's difficult to grant, and you all could consider these things on a case-by-case basis.
Well, I will say that the way this is written, there's A, not that many buildings that are covered, and B, it has to be an existing structure, so I think that greatly limits, any future. If we just looked at the ban, period, then I could definitely see that being Pandora's box. But this, to me, is very limited. It's nothing on Main Street, nothing on North Astor Street, and it has to be in the business district. So there's just not that many buildings, period, that this applies to.
Yeah, but I'm just wondering, why this town would need more than one parking structure, and if the need arose, then it could be considered at a future date.
Well, Marianne, maybe you can talk about how
Well,
you
just
can.
about, you couldn't, they'd never be able to get a variance for it, because it would have to be a use variance, since it's not not a permitted use, and you can only get a use variance if you can show there's no other way for the property to be used. Unless you can prove that, you can't get a use variance. And it's not a way to deal, use variances aren't a way to deal with zoning issues, with the zoning issues. This is the right way to handle this is by the board saying it's permitted. But anyway, I wouldn't have brought that up, except that you said, couldn't you issue a variance? No, you couldn't.
Well, I don't pretend to know the minutiae here, but it seems to me that the town doesn't need any more than one parking structure. That's my only comment.
Would the, again, I don't know all the laws here then, laws may be the wrong word. What about, right now, the Irvington Boathouse, the restaurant that's right there? Are these considered part of the business district?
They're in the waterfront district.
So so the waterfront district is not considered part of the business district?
Correct. It's a different
Separate
district.
zoning.
Thank you.
Really only a very tiny, Larry and I did a calculation of the number of, or Larry did the calculation of the number of acres because if it would affect 25 acres, you have to do SEQA. And it was like
5 acres.
4 acres.
4 or 5
something.
acres,
It was
it's not much.
Tiny,
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, you're really talking about, the area to, along South Astor Street essentially, but not the Burnham Building, because the Burnham Building fronts on Main Street. So the DPW yard, which, again, this is for existing structures, so if any of you can envision any of those buildings being a parking structure, you're a better person than I am. Maybe when the site is empty, that's a different story, but then this doesn't apply to that.
There wouldn't be an existing building.
Right. And then there's a couple of properties on North Buckout Street, but again, you're talking about essentially the post office building and 2 buildings to the north of that, to the south of that.
Which are not necessarily multi-story either.
No, and we're talking and that's on only the west side of North Buckout Street. The east side is actually not in the business district. I know looks at where the row houses are on North Buckout Street. That's not the business district. And then there's a couple of buildings along South Broadway that are part of the business district that would be part of this, but we're talking about the garage building next to the restaurant building itself. I mean, these are buildings that you'd never even envision in their existing form being a parking structure.
And they would have to be in their existing form, that's one of the...
Yeah, I mean, you can't even add another story to it and have it still qualify under this law.
So it's literally like about 9 buildings.
Yeah, like I said, the acreage is very small.
But we could end up with 9 buildings as parking lots,
No.
essentially.
No, because practically it couldn't happen.
Yeah, practically speaking,
The
no.
buildings, there has to be an existing building. All these buildings they're describing, you could never have a parking structure in them.
Right.
Laurie, would you maybe be able to bring up, do you have your connection that you can bring up, just to show the area on on Google Maps? Like, the buildings that we're actually talking about, so I think people can see what we're talking about.
Sure.
Then while he's getting up, I just want to be sure that, at least in my understanding, so I'm always open for correction, but this is not, I heard someone mention that, Irvington only needs 1 parking garage, or, at most. But what I want to point out is this is actually private parking. It would be under the control of the Astor Buck folks, and they would be giving out the passes or the permitting to employees in various businesses in the Trent Building, and so it's not really going to be, as far as I understand, it's not going to be general access parking. Of course, unless I'm wrong, Bill, am I wrong on that?
You're perfectly right.
And in terms of any concerns about safety, that would be what the planning board would be taking a look at in site plan approval. Ordinarily, there wouldn't be site plan approval if there's not a new structure going in. That's why we added this, so that they would look at like parking circulation and make sure that, it would be safe getting in and out of any site. So that would be the main thing that the planning board would look at site plan review. They would also review the lighting.
Traffic and noise.
Yeah.
all that stuff, all the environmental stuff.
So just to give you a frame of reference, the specific building we're talking about, I'll show you here while I have this on, and then I think I can bring up a copy of the zoning map, which you can take a look at also. And so the building we're talking about here is, Main Street is up here on the top. Metro North parking lot is here. The building is right here where it's labeled Hudson Loft, but it's more than that. So that's the building that we've been discussing tonight. Right here. All right, so that's, any questions about that? I can move on to the zoning map if you want to see what the business district looks like. Good?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
And the building to the right of it is residential, right? It's apartments.
Yeah.
No, just have to. Well, I mean, we did a lot of this at a work session last week, I think. And you may have, I think there may have been something printed in one of the local papers recently, but this is the rendering that was provided to us by the owners of that property. Just give it a second to come into focus. Sorry, it's not scripted. I wasn't planning on this. All right, let me see if best place to find something. Sorry, I have to.
Sorry, Larry. I didn't give you-
No, I just have to get access to the zoning map, that's all. I have to think about what that is. I'm not sure, I thought I had it in this folder, sorry. Give me a second, I'm sorry.
Is it on the main website?
Yeah, it is. It's just that some are easier than others. Actually attached to this law
That's sort of, the park was just saying.
yeah, attached to this law that's in the back. It's actually a different topic we're talking about here. But, okay. No, I got. Yeah, now I can get it. No, it's in my local law folder because it's associated with the law that we're working on, right? Yeah. Okay.
It's just cooler when it's colored.
You just like watching me struggle, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Caesar has one visually in the back. There we go.
All right.
You know you know how to zoom out.
Okay. So, business district is in green here. I don't know how clear that is on here, but it's everything labeled B here. So, again, you're talking about Main Street itself, a little bit of South Broadway, the gas station, I suppose. No, that's on Main
No,
Street,
it's
sorry.
on Main.
Apologize.
Yeah, so nothing on Main, all of us.
Nothing on Main, right? And nothing on North Astor. So we'll just zoom in a little bit here since. So there's not a lot, like I was trying to describe.
Yeah, so I think it's River City Grill, right? That
Yeah.
building?
River
Oh,
City
so, yeah.
Grill and the
River
garage.
City Grill and the garage next to it.
And then, yeah, that's right, and the grill, and the building that the grill is in, and there's a couple of
And
retail stores there.
There's
the garage,
deli.
the garage there, I believe, is only one story. So if they wanted to use it for parking, you could park in the garage.
It's not
I
a,
would say that,
it's not a
I
structure
would
though.
say that that's almost, what they're doing now.
Yeah,
So it's
right.
not like,
But even then, it's one level, that's not.
Right, that's what-
It doesn't meet the definition of
It's not like
structure.
you're- It's not like you're it's not like you're making a real
Right.
parking structure, you're just be parking in it, which is the same as you
Which
do
you
now.
can do anyway, you can
Right.
park. It's just the thing that's forbidden are structures.
Right.
Parking structures, assuming more than one level.
Right.
That's how it's.
And I will say another interesting thing about this particular site that we're talking about, or that the owner asked us about, they had been using it for parking already. in the past, so.
But one level.
One level,
so it
on one
didn't
level.
so it wasn't a parking
constitute
structure, that was, you know, it had been parking already, so it's not, again, like a completely foreign use, so a lot of the flows and things are kind of new. So I think, I mean, to me, actually, is the post office more than one story? I think it's a single story as well, right?
Yeah, I think it's one story.
So that means they also couldn't have a parking structure. So the only thing I think of the two, basically look like multifamily houses to the south of the post office, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't think that those are practical either, because they're. So this is, I mean, well, we couldn't give a variance for one building. This is pretty close to giving a variance for one building, but legally doing it, in my opinion. And my lawyer's opinion, which is much more important than mine.
Well, in addition to which, by doing it this way, you've got the other regulations of the business district applying to it. You know, whereas if it's a variant, then you would have to come up with all rules for it, you know, so it's just a, zoning wise, it's just a better way to do it.
And I think frankly, to me, to solve the parking issues of Astor Buck, which, you know, I see a lot of familiar faces that have come to meetings about this, would be, I think, good for the neighborhood, good for this board, good for everybody. You know, without having this be, you know, kind of a, you know, it's not getting rid of the parking structure ban, which we would have to do a lot of work on. You know, if all of Main Street was included or something, we'd have to do a lot of work on this. But because it really, in essence, allows it for one building and, you know, I guess theoretically some other buildings that it wouldn't really make sense in, you know, we've kind of figured out a way to do it, which is why we thought it was such a great idea. Please, sure.
Janae LeBlanc, I'm on North Lookout. So this is a private structure,
Yes.
and the need that we are servicing, aside from someone mentioned some employees of,
All
Astor Buck or the Trent Building?
All of the businesses in the Trent Building, they've been before us for
Years.
8 years or so. I don't know, I've lost track. Trying to get approval for a parking lot along South Buckout, right south of the Trent Building. And, you know, there's been a lot of back and forth and various design proposals, and the neighborhood residents were fairly strongly against the parking lot for many reasons. So this offers a solution to their parking problem and helps get cars off the street.
so the problem as defined is the parking that is not available now is to service employees around that area. I just wanted to be clear where the need, how is the need being defined, and is it beyond that? And I'm not saying that's not valid, but
I don't understand.
in terms of public parking or parking around Irvington, servicing all of our restaurants on Main Street, our businesses on Main Street, is there other parking need that this would address, or is the parking
I
need
think
limited?
the only public parking issue that this would address was when, I would say now 10 years ago, we used to get a lot of complaints about parking at Spiro Park, so up Station Road, Maple Street, Oak Street, that the employees would park there. And then, you know, people would come home and they wouldn't be able to park because there'd be employees from the building parked on their street. So that's when they originally said, hey, we'd like to get those cars and put them into a lot that we'll build. That's why we listened to that proposal, you know, 10 years ago or 8 years ago. So that is still, to me, you know, an issue that it would be better, I think, for that neighborhood to get those cars that are, you know, and then I think it's 2-hour parking now. So that means that they have to keep continually moving their cars. So, you know, I think
Some is 6.
Some is 6. But so to me, it's also a better solution, both for not just the business, but also for the neighborhood, to still get those cars off the street. Anybody else? Any of the neighbors that have spoken before have any input? I know you guys spoke briefly last time, but
I'll just comment on what
some of the people said. Kevin Gallagher, South Buckout. Sounds like I may come to the defense of Estabrook, but by having more spots in that building, that will free up more public parking on the street. Because the people that park on the street now work in Trent Building. Now they can have their own garage. There'll be more parking on the street for, for public parking, so.
And I think the visual impacts from where you live, and you directly look at it. I mean, we walked it together. We don't anticipate a lot of, glare and things, especially if we do the lighting right. We don't, because there's such a large hill. It goes down so, so steeply that there shouldn't be many of those problems that are typical of the parking structure.
Shouldn't be any problems at all.
Shouldn't remove any of the trees.
Yeah, right. It's almost that the whole upper portion will remain almost intact, right? Maybe some of the lower trees, but the upper trees will be fine. Any other public comment? And what do you guys think? Have we heard enough, or do we need to hear more?
I think I'd like to give one more opportunity for some letters and/or public comment.
And let Connie be able to vote on it as well.
Let Connie vote as well. Okay, then we'll leave the public hearing open until the meeting on, was it the 20th, which is that Thursday? Again, it's a Thursday meeting because Monday, our regular meeting date, is President's Day, so.
And this has gone to the planning board, correct?
I received an email from someone on the planning board, so we'll make sure that everyone gets a copy of it.
We didn't circulate it directly.
Okay. All right.
Can we just, if they have some feedback they'd like to give?
Caesar's here, and I got one from another member, so they're aware of it, but we can send them a letter, we can send them a copy.
So,
Any strong comments, please let us know.
No strong comments.
Very good.
weak comments?
We'll take care of the issues when it comes before the board.
Perfect. So next up, I'll make a motion to open a public hearing and consider a local law amending the zoning code to create the North Broadway mixed-use district. Do I have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
The public hearing is now open. Mary Ann, would you like to give us an update? I mean, I know I feel like we've done this a few times.
Yeah, well, okay, we want to just do the changes since the last draft.
That's probably the best.
Which aren't changes, if anybody was here for the last meeting, there's no changes since the last meeting. These changes are since the September 17th
Can I
draft.
just stop for a second? Brian, I like the changes, but I wonder if we're going to be voting on this tonight, maybe, or are we, is the first question. And if we are, maybe we need a, kind of like maybe we need a consent. I think first, just for the people who've really been following it, go through, maybe just highlight the changes first, and then maybe give us a general feel of what's in the overall, to bring everyone else up to speed.
Okay, I'll
Whatever.
do the overview, because sort of the changes don't make a lot of sense.
Okay.
Without accepting that context. Okay, so what this does is it creates a new zoning district. Essentially, it's on North Broadway, just south of the multifamily buildings and north of Strawberry. It's where there's several big parcels, the big White House, Abbott House, the Maxon property, two properties owned by the Holy Spirit Association, and then the house that's just north of the big white building. There's also a little residential lot in there that's purely residential, and it really sort of doesn't make sense. It's much different from the other parcels that are in there, what Larry's pointing to, so that would change to the zoning. What it is across the street is the 1 Act 20, which is what it used to be. I should say that the purpose of this is it came out of the comprehensive plan update, which wanted it rezoned to reflect what's actually there, the uses that are there and other uses that would make sense on parcels that size, and also to keep as much open space there as possible. Okay, so then it comes up with there's a list of permitted uses, which are three or four, attached one-family dwellings or three or more family dwellings. So attached one-family dwellings would be like attached townhouses, would be a permitted use. Senior living facilities with certain conditions. Boutique hotels. Boutique hotels are defined as hotels that aren't bigger than 50 rooms, and they would be allowed only if there's access on Broadway or East Sunnyside Lane. Offices, research and design, small practice medical offices, and all these terms are defined. A small practice medical office is one that would have a staff of not more than 4 employees, so it would be quite small. Conference centers, full-service restaurants, places of worship, which is allowed there now, annual membership clubs, which are allowed there now, lots with direct access to Broadway and or East Sunnyside Lane, that are breakfast establishments, and then accessory buildings. And then it's got minimum lot requirements. Each lot has to be at least 2 acres, and it tells you how to measure the things. That it's got, it sets setbacks, front yard setbacks of 75 feet and rear and side of 50, but almost more important than that, along Broadway, there's a buffer. No buildings are allowed within 250 feet of Broadway, so it saves the green space along Broadway. It sets coverage limits, which are 20% of the lot, 20% of the buildable area of the lot is the lot coverage, and that can be increased a little bit. Okay. There's one coverage for buildings and one for lot coverage, including driveways and stuff like that. The building coverage is 20%. The building coverage limit is 20%. The lot coverage limit is 30%. It does allow for a bonus up to 5% to preserve the historic structure. The height of buildings is pretty much the same as it is in the code, 35 feet, except if your building's within 250 feet of Broadway, it can't be taller than 2 stories. Beyond that, it could go 3 stories. It has floor area ratio limitations to limit how big the buildings on the site could be. There's regulations about lighting, which pretty much reflects the overall lighting laws that the village passed recently. Essentially, that all lighting has to be dark sky compliant and be the minimum necessary for health and safety. I don't want to give, I haven't given anything that's really, you don't need anything really detailed. It's got parking requirements. And then, in addition to just the standard requirements for special permits, the planning board, one thing I should say. I actually should have said this in the very beginning. Any of the uses in this district have to be by special permit. They're all there's no as of right uses. They're all special permit, and a special permit will be granted by the planning board. I'm sorry, I would know I was going to point and square one to, I would have prepared it a little bit better, but, okay. And then there's standards for the, for special permit, and the first one is that it can't have a significant visual impact on the character of Broadway. You can't remove or modify stone walls unless it's absolutely necessary for the proposed use. And existing buildings that reflect the historic character of the village shall be maintained or adaptively used to the greatest extent practicable. It can't generate noise or create other disturbance that would be detrimental to nearby properties. Any use has to be in harmony with the character and appearance of neighboring properties. It can't result in and significant traffic impacts, and those are defined, what would be a significant traffic impact. If you're gonna have a use that's gonna use Strawberry Lane to either come out or go in, you have to improve so much of Strawberry Lane from Broadway to wherever you're coming in and out. And there's one other thing that's added to the, well, it's not really, this is already in our code, I'm sorry, about the affordable housing requirement for assisted living facilities. The zoning map has changed to make it the NDMD North Broadway Mixed Use District. And there's another small change that permits the village to collect taxes, hotel taxes, if there's a hotel or bed and breakfast. That's pretty much it.
I forgot how close to NIMBY that is.
I know. It looks like that.
I mean, I think we've, as a board, I think we've talked about this quite a bit, so I don't know if anybody else has any thoughts. Otherwise, I'd be happy to open it up to the public.
Well, I just think, just to restate, one of the key goals that came out of the comprehensive plan discussions was to develop zoning that really help guide potential developers as to what they could do, rather than what we'd experienced in the past, where developers would come in and they would have to start proposing zoning changes to do what they want to do. So everything became not like a short process. Things couldn't get to the planning board without first going through all the back and forth about potential zoning changes. And in the case of the two cases I think of, one in South Broadway, one in North Broadway, really went on for 12 months, 18 months or longer in those discussions. So we thought it was, and the comprehensive plan committees pointed out they thought it was important to have a kind of proactive zoning for this area that put in all the protections and the limitations up front, so people would come in, eyes wide open, so to speak, with what they were going to be able to do. It's going to be much harder for them to come in to get variances because a lot of stuff is pretty well locked down.
That reminds me of a point I should have made in the beginning, is right now that's zoned essentially 1 acre residential zoning. And none of the property is being used that way. All the property is being used for different uses. It's either by variance or by special permit or by pre-existing non-conforming uses. So the zoning totally doesn't match what's going on there. Actually, the only lot that's being used residentially is the one that we pulled out of the district, the one that looks like Idaho there, sitting above 120.
I'd also like to, point out, I think everyone realizes this, but the fact that we have just opened this hearing doesn't mean that it hasn't been opened before and discussed at length. Again, it is still the first time that we're reopening this hearing with these changes, and I'm curious to hear if there's any public comment.
Well, actually, we did it the last meeting, the 23rd, wasn't it? Reopened on the 23rd?
We did.
Yeah, I have my notes from explaining it at the 23rd meeting, the changes and the other one.
I think but that was that to call the hearing? I don't know. I know we talked about this many times. I think we started our
Yeah,
first.
that was a public hearing, wasn't it, on January?
They're all blending together. I think the first one we had was back in, was it August? I think it might have been August.
Well, the resolution that's in here actually outlines when the hearings were, but I didn't know if I missed the.
Oh, it was
January
actually,
25th.
August, it was June 3rd, 2019.
Yeah.
I remember people were worried we were trying to pass it over the summer. So, now we're trying to pass it before we get to summer again.
And again, this is the first time I think there's been an opportunity
On the
for people to do on these new plans.
Correct.
Yeah, no, you know, at the last meeting, the public hearing was called for tonight, and that's
Oh,
and that's where you outlined.
You
Explain the
explained it there,
changes.
sorry,
Yeah.
Larry.
Right.
But yeah, so we've had, several, we received some great comments. I mean, this law has changed quite a bit from when we first got it. I think, again, it's typically our goal to work with the residents, the neighbors, the property holders, staff, and try to come up with the best law possible. So, along those lines, let's open it up to the public for any additional comments. Please.
My name's Peter Ruderi. I live across Broadway on Meadowbrook Road. I just don't understand the rationale for how it says that the purpose is to maintain the scenic character of Broadway, but in fact, the FAR is up to 4 times as much as it is now zoned for. It's for commercial. It goes up to 0.45, and in the IF40 that it is now, the maximum will be 0.12. The commercial use, there's no commercial uses anywhere near this part of the village.
Well, aren't those all commercial uses now?
Well, yes, those are existing uses.
Since the 70s, yeah.
Right, that were grandfathered in, and they're very discreet, and they're way set back, and they're in old buildings, and you can barely see them from Broadway.
And that's pretty much what we tried to do with this zoning, is to maintain that.
Well, that doesn't look like it's going to be the case, because now there can be multifamily buildings, there can be doctor's offices with, if I read correctly, up to 50 parking spaces required on them.
But you have to
Because you're
also
requiring-
understand that would be for probably one of the properties you could have that. So they're limited by the properties, but do you know how many parking spots are currently on, say, the Carafiello property? I'm just curious if you've looked up there. I don't, maybe you have. But they used to have 200 parking spots there at one time, and people at 200 cars would be there every day. So, I don't think we're changing. I think we're actually are trying to preserve what's currently there, with not allowing it to expand via, a continuum or a bright view coming in and coming up with a new proposal, which to me is a lot more likely to pass on a whim than if we have kind of comprehensive new zone, and that was kind of the whole purpose of it.
So you're referring, Brightview was assisted living?
Correct.
Okay, so now you're making it as a right to have assisted living.
Well, it's still a special permit, but it's also not them coming in and saying, this is what we want, will you change the zoning for us? We're changing the zoning to say, this is what you can build. Because I don't think, well, I speak for myself as the person who voted down Brightview. I wasn't against assisted living. I was against a giant assisted living facility that kind of loomed over Broadway, is how I put it. So the way this works is, if they came in again, they'd see that they cannot get that before we wasted, almost 2 years of our time. It would be, if someone wanted to build a small assisted living facility there, I think that'd be great. I think that'd be a great use.
So the density is roughly similar to the 5,000 square foot zoning, which there is a little piece next to it, but everything around is 20,000 square foot, and it's now 40,000 square foot. I mean, why not just allow, if the existing uses are not to be maintained, why not just allow them to be developed as single-family residences in line with everything basically that's around?
I think one of the reasons for us was we wanted to preserve that open space. And if you get rid of if you said it was just going to be residential, I don't think you'd be able to maintain that open space in the front there. And that was one of the things we really wanted to maintain, with the setbacks and everything else. We had a proposal before us, before Brightview, so they wanted to grandfather in under the old zoning before we have zoned it to 140, 1F40. So they had basically a 1F20 grandfathered in, they could have built, I think it was 8 houses, and it was just a terrible plan where they basically just ripped up the whole thing. And that's kind of, I think, always been in the back of our mind, that if we just said, let this be, just say, oh, you know what, let's say that as soon as that someone tries to sell the building, they can't even sell it and use it as the current thing, they're going to have to tear it down and build McMansions. we just thought that that was not the best use for that, because it would really change the way coming in. There's a very unique feeling when you drive by, when you come into Irvington, you know it's Irvington, because there's those big open lawns, there's that big open space there, and that's what we wanted to maintain, and that's what we're trying to do with this.
May I walk over there and
Sure.
ask you about the sense of scale? Because the 250-foot buffer that you're referring to would seem to me, correct me if I'm wrong, something like this much.
Sorry if that were pointing, but okay.
You can see?
Well, I can see where you're
Well,
trying.
I don't know how accurate, is that about where you were pointing?
I would say less than the rear property line of this one, so somewhere around here, it seems to me. And considering the way it slopes up the hill, that first 250 feet is basically invisible. You're seeing this entire hill rise up quite steeply from Broadway. Everything that's behind it, which could be now hotels, townhouses, assisted living, doctor's office, all of these things could be completely taking up that hillside. It just does, it seems to accomplish the opposite of what the stated purpose, both here and in the secret application is. Not to mention traffic, because North Broadway is already pretty crowded in traffic toward the end of the day.
In the morning, yeah.
And, right, around rush hour. And now you're gonna have, there's no other way to get to the site. I mean, hopefully people aren't gonna go up Strawberry Lane and get to properties. They're all gonna have to go in from Broadway. It just seems like it's legalizing lots of problems and not, I don't, it's just making compared with what the existing zoning is, or you could
But how
downzone the
about
IF 20.
let's talk about the existing
much
use
better.
right now, as opposed to the existing zoning.
Right.
So I think that's kind of what we were more trying to, kind of, rather than having that, acting under these old permits, and some of them are, questionable, to kind of legalize that. So I think as a board, and as the comprehensive planning committee, which included, I think in that committee, I think we had 16 or 20 people on the North Broadway rezoning committee. They felt that, trying to maintain what's there now was a worthy goal, because it's been that way for 50 years or so, and that we didn't need to go back to just making it residential when we have lots of residential in Irvington, we have very little commercial. So I think that was part of the goal, was maintaining that.
And, I think sometimes when you read the list of permitted uses, it doesn't mean we're gonna have one of each. It's a limited area. We're not gonna have a boutique hotel and an assisted living facility and a restaurant and 5 other, those are possible uses of this very specific geographical area. And we did spend, I think someone mentioned the process before, I think this fits the definition of having been a robust process, where we heard from people who are interested in developing, we heard from lots of neighbors, we heard from people who will feel that their property will be impacted by how this is developed. And we're trying to be creative in how to best serve the village long-term, broad base. It's not perfect, there is no perfect, but we've had an awful lot of input into this. And again, it will be, each proposal will have to go through a very robust process, but it won't be scattershot. There'll be some guidelines.
But I wanted to add that we also had a lot of, planning, technical input that actually looked at what the building coverages were currently, then the FARs of the current structures versus what would happen if the zoning was changed to match a series of FAR and coverage goalposts, shall we say. And we looked at some examples of what could possibly be built there in terms of footprints and stuff like that. Not specific uses, but just what someone might consider doing, it just out of the box without any kind of creative use. But, and I think a lot of that was very helpful in helping us to get comfortable with the numbers being proposed, especially when you compare directly to what's existing, the numbers for the existing structures that are there. So the only way that you can really go backwards, into significantly less coverage is going to be by tearing down a lot of structures. And I just don't see that is a reasonable thing for people to be doing.
And I think too, one of the things we try to do is protect anything that was historical there. There are probably half dozen historical buildings on those properties. And that's something we also didn't want to see torn down, which would be very likely if it would just went to single family, because they don't really make sense from a single family home perspective.
If I could just say a couple things about FAR. I know there's a situation where it could go up to .45 FAR, but understand that that's not the only limitation. Actually, the bigger limitation on 5 of the properties is the coverage, that it can only be 20% coverage. And if you took that 20% coverage and multiplied it by 3, going up 3 floors, you couldn't possibly get to an FAR of .45, because coverage is based on the net buildable area, which means you subtract steep slopes. So if you do that, so actually for 5, there's 6 properties in here. For 5 of the properties, the much more limiting factor is the coverage. So you couldn't go up to 4.
But
Close
the lot coverage is...
And, oh, I'm sorry, one other thing on the FAR. There isn't any FAR now for those buildings. We have an FAR for residential only, but there is no FAR for the commercial structures or that are there by special permit, or if any, religious thing, any of the other special permit uses that are permitted now went in, there isn't any FAR.
To understand that, you're saying they could be enlarged without restraint as to FAR, the existing structures? What do you mean there's no FAR? Because the structures themselves have an FAR.
There's no defined in code.
No, there's no limitation. In our code, the only FAR limitation is for residential.
So those existing structures could be demolished and an unlimited, they couldn't be demolished.
Well, no,
They're
there's
by special
limits. They have to meet the setbacks, they have to meet coverage, they have to meet height. There are certain limitations. That's my point, that the more limiting factor than FAR is the coverage that's allowed.
But if those existing buildings are there by special permit, I just literally don't understand what you're saying. Are you saying they can be
No,
enlarged?
I'm not talking about only those buildings. There are other uses permitted there besides residences. You can have the special permit uses that are allowed now there. Forget about the new zone places of worship, including parish houses, religious schools, annual membership clubs. There are other uses that are allowed by special permit, and on those there is no FAR.
Okay, those are also allowed in all residential zones.
Yes.
So,
There's not that many residential zones that are this large. These are some of the few large properties.
For the record, Taylor Palmer with the law firm of Cuddy and Fader on behalf of the owners of 76 North Broadway. We have very limited comments this evening. We just wanted to mention, again, thank you to the village board as consultants and sit and village staff for going through a very long review process from the comprehensive planning to incorporating the comments from AKRF, the village's planner, and considering the comments submitted just for the purpose of the record so that it can be incorporated by reference. We just wanted to reference our December 9th, 2019 letter, our November 13th, November 13th, 2019 letter, as well as our September 4th, 2019 letter, and also just want to reference our comments that were made at the January 15th work session, the November 13th work session, the November 21st meeting with village staff, the October 7th work session, the October 21st work session, and the September 11th work session, all regarding this North Broadway mixed-use district. So we really appreciate all of your time and the consideration this evening, and again, we're pleased to you've given us such an opportunity to all the neighbors and the residents to consider the multifaceted impacts to the entire district. So, thank you.
Somebody else? Yeah. The only thing I feel bad about is Connie's not here.
Leave it open, there's no reason.
Should we take one more time?
One more time.
Yeah, I'd be in favor of waiting a little bit longer, one more meeting and see if there's any more input.
And we should all have an opportunity to vote on this.
We should find out what the record is for numerous public hearings. Yeah, I'd be willing to keep the public hearing open until the next meeting. Makes sense.
You could though, if you want to, we had done a secret analysis of this before.
Yeah.
And you issued a negative declaration that there wouldn't be any negative environmental impacts.
So that's the next item on here. Anyway.
Right, but I went through it again, in light of all of the changes, and in my mind, it doesn't change. If the board reads through it and feels the same way, you can just reaffirm.
I think that's fine to get that
You can do that separately, yeah.
I just had one question, and maybe it's just me being a little bit overly anal about things, but I think it's section 2, or part 2, question number 9, aesthetic resources, impact on aesthetics. It's neither yes nor no is checked. And I'm just wondering if there's a reason for that. It's page 6 of 10, I think part 2.
Oh, yeah, okay, that should be no.
And then,
So who's got the one that you're gonna sign? Brian, do you have the one you're gonna sign? Assuming you
so all the
sign it.
little no check,
So on
no,
page 6.
Number 9.
Yeah, put in no at the top.
and then those little small boxes in the center row, center column should be checked.
Well, you don't actually have to do them, but,
Every other box is section
Okay.
done that way. No, there's also, oh, maybe so.
Anyway,
Oh, you're right.
doesn't matter. Good for you, Mark. Any other questions on this? Otherwise, this will get accepted.
I was getting into that.
May I comment?
Sure.
If, now, I may just not understand, but downloading the PDF, if you're talking about the secra, after the 3rd page, on the download, nothing is checked at all. Is that correct?
I don't know what page you're talking about.
Part 1.
Well, this says 13 pages.
Well, tell me
Shall
what
I
it
show you?
says up here. I don't know what's downloaded, I just know that it's
I don't think it's proposed for potential development, right?
So, is this thing? So after page,
Oh, yeah, you don't have to, because if you read number, yeah. Does it involve the amendment of a plan, local law, ordinance, or rule? Yes. If yes, complete sections C, F, and G. You don't have to do D and E.
so all the rest is non-applicable.
Right.
Just that.
Yeah.
It's good reading practice for me tonight. I think I'm not forgetting. Whereas the Board of Trustees on June 17, 2019 reviewed the environmental assessment form and issued a negative declaration under the State Environmental Quality Review Act on a proposed local law amending the Irvington zoning code to create the North Broadway mixed-use district. And whereas the course of a number of public hearings and work sessions held since June 2019, a number of changes were made to the proposed North Broadway zoning law. And whereas the Board of Trustees reviewed the environmental assessment form in connection with the amended North Broadway zoning law and determined that adoption of the local law as amended will not have negative environmental impacts. Now therefore be it resolved that the negative declaration issued on June 17, 2019 be reaffirmed. I'll make a motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor? So you need to sign these, Mary Ann?
Yeah, you can sign the one you've got.
Yep. Made changes.
Is it signed already?
Oh, wait.
I think
You
it's
don't
signed.
need to sign it.
We already reaffirmed the other one?
Just when you reaffirmed it, the other one is okay.
Right.
Perfect.
But you got the check marks in it.
Yes.
Got too many check marks.
Yeah, I'll
Next up is a volunteer appointment to the Theater Commission. Resolved to appoint the following volunteer committee member to the Theater Commission, Eric Bernstein, as a member for a term to expire December 2022. I'll make a motion. If I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor? Next up is a resignation from the Irvington Woods Committee. Resolved to accept with regret the resignation of Dana Sabatino from the Irvington Woods Committee, effective February 2020. I'll make a motion if I have a second. All in favor? Aye. Next up is the award of contract 2020-01 for Station Road Main Street Pedestrian Improvement Project. Our first new contract, Larry.
Yeah, that's right.
Exciting.
So, yeah, I mean, this is the project we've been planning for some time. It's a federally funded, federal aid project, sidewalk project associated with installing a sidewalk from essentially the tunnel along Station Road for probably 800 plus feet, going back to Woodbine.
And we'll hook up with the sidewalk that's existing.
Yep. And then there'll also be a number of ADA curb ramp modifications along Main Street at the various side street crossings, and also some changes to the locations of the curbs to create shorter and safer crossings across Main Street. Well, as you can see from the attached, there were 6 bids received, ranging. We're awarding the base bid only, and those bids range from about $1.2 million up to $1.9 million. The lowest bid, the bidder's been reviewed, and all the bids have been analyzed and by our engineers. They are recommending an award to the low bidder, whose references all checked out. Some of the numbers were slightly different. You'll see the sheet in the back are kind of the raw numbers, but the resolution has the correct numbers. There's always a few math errors on the bids that are submitted, so that's why there's a discrepancy. But the resolution reflects everything correctly.
So, Larry, just as an aside, I assume all the neighbors, this is running on the south side, right?
South side of Station Road, yes.
So all the neighbors have been contacted about it?
The ones along the property whom they affect have been in discussions throughout all of this.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I would comment Larry's done a great job keeping everyone up to date.
Well, it'll still be a difficult project. It's not an easy road to work on, as you know, from the culvert project, but see how it goes.
Some of it, there's, absolutely no land to work on.
Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to see how that cantilever the sidewalk.
Yeah,
over the brook.
it's all been engineered.
We have troll living underneath it now.
It's our fishing pier.
Yeah. Great fish.
So that's it.
Any other questions? This is a great project that we're finally doing. I know you like doing difficult engineering projects, but...
Yeah, I thought Hudson View Park was the last one, but apparently not.
At least this one's above ground.
Yeah.
I mean, I hate to say it, but and I'm sure you already have planned, that road really can't take much lane closure, it's very...
It's going to just be, it's going to be nice and quiet like it was when they filmed the movie.
Yeah, the traffic plan will be worked out with the contractor. That's not, we can...
It's too soon for that. But...
Yeah, I mean, we lay out what our minimum standards are, but they're aware of the fact that if there's a lane closure and that they'll need traffic control, of course. We were open to the idea of a permanent closure for a limited time, but all of that has to be negotiated.
Right.
We have to see what the cost benefit of that is. I mean, it can't be closed for the entire summer, for example, but if there's a key, 3-week window or something where it makes sense to really push things along, we would certainly consider it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Whereas the Main Street and Station Road Pedestrian Improvement Project is locally administered federal aid project, whereas bid documents for the project were prepared by the village's engineer, Creighton Manning Engineering, publicly advertised by the village, and whereas 6 bids were received by the village on January 17, 2020, and publicly read, and whereas Creighton Manning Engineering has recommended to the village that the bid submitted by Giaffia Corporation, 179 Brady Avenue, North, New York, 10532, in the amount of $1,256,164.16 is responsive to the specifications and is the lowest responsible bidder. Now therefore be it resolved that the village board, I'm sorry. The village hereby awards contract 2020-01 for the Main Street and Station Road Pedestrian Improvement Project, Jaffa Corporation, in the amount of $1,256,164.16, contingent upon the New York State Department of Transportation and Federal Highway Administration concurrence with the award, and further resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the mayor or village administrator to execute said contract. I'll make a motion if I could have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Good job, Larry.
You just want this.
Happy to second.
Yeah.
Approval of supplemental agreement with Creighton Manning Engineering for construction support and inspection services. I think
So-
this might be related.
Yeah. So, I know everything goes in steps here, so and it's all tied to the federal grant. So the federal grant, had been settled for the design aspect of this project. We're now moving into construction. The designers for this project were obviously Creighton Manning Engineering, as you mentioned. We are now doing what they call a supplemental agreement, which would allow for the construction, inspection, and other support services that they'll provide during construction. So this is their contract. Again, all of this is eligible and subject to proportionate reimbursement of federal aid. So this particular contract is $166,000, and it's supplemental to the other agreement.
Questions? Whereas the village selected Creighton Manning Engineering through a competitive process to provide design and engineering services associated with the Main Street and Station Road Pedestrian Improvement Project, and approved a consulting agreement for said services on December 18, 2017. And whereas Creighton Manning Engineering will provide construction support and inspection services during the construction phase of said project, now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees hereby authorizes the village administrator or mayor execute a supplemental work agreement number 1 with Creighton Manning Engineering in the amount not to exceed $166,000 for construction support and inspection services. I'll make the motion if I can have a second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. That's the first time we've had or the mayor.
Yeah.
on these.
Hey, Larry's offsetting some signing.
To be honest with you, I wanted to cover all bets because every so often you come across a requirement where the chief elected has to sign it, and I didn't want to run into having to wait for another meeting to fix that. So I'm just covering it by saying either of us. Usually I can do it, but just, you never know.
Larry really likes my signature.
I really don't like to wait is the problem,
Yeah.
so.
And you're not running for office.
No.
Or we're retiring.
Yeah,
That we know of at least.
no.
Next up is the budget workshop for police.
So if you give us a second, we're going to just slide our seats over, our tables over a little bit. So we can-
Yeah, I don't care how to,
Sorry.
worry about it, you don't need, yeah, I'll blame you.
Sorry, it's a
So
little
why
awkward.
should I have a copy?
In the latest 538 poll,
We're trying to move what?
it's Bernie with 22, Elizabeth Warren 18, Pete Buttigieg with 16, and Biden with 13.
You're kidding.
What's
What's that?
It's like the last Des Moines Register poll.
Oh, the phone.
That's what I mean, it's over.
to kind of be diagonal. Hold on. I'm going to turn this just like
Sorry, I didn't have a public hearing.
Listen, my feeling was simply on both of these. I don't like to vote the first time, even though there was a lot of other options.
Well, especially since there were people who had issues.
I'll be right back.
That's what
No, at this point, we can say, you know, you may still not like it, but we thought this through.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
Well, I
yeah.
think that's.
You still get a
No,
chance
it's
to
just,
say
I
it.
think it's actually better that people comment.
Yeah, no, that's why I want to encourage one more time.
And some people
Comments, but-
No, just background.
My feeling is,
come
when
with
we
a
first
feeling
look at
and
something, there
not
should be
with the-
just
not
another
with
opportunity.
research.
People aren't always looking to see that first time that it's there.
Right.
Okay, bye, everybody.
See ya.
Bye, Larry.
There's another one over here.
Yeah, but I don't want to discriminate, you know, they might have a special order.
You can use that one first.
It's not FIFO or whatever, first in, first out.
First book of the year.
Actually, we'll wait for that portion, but in the meantime, I can give you an overview of the budget.
Perfect.
Are these initials with our names?
Yes, they are. The
And you're-
zeros from last year, it's the same book as the pages are.
And you're gonna take them back?
Yeah. I can do that, once you like, so
Pen mark on mine.
I can take them. So, here we are again, doing another budget. You open your books, the first page will give a schedule of budget hearings.
Groundhog Day.
Usually I did.
What I did is I wrote up kind of a little synopsis of the different parts of the budget, the moving parts, and where we are today. And this will help really, when you review the various departmental requests, you're able to see whether it's perhaps doable or not in the entire entity, or looking at the entire budget as far as assessed values and where we are. So I can go through each of those items. I may read a little bit of it because I put a lot of thought into it. And I'm going to talk about assessed values first. It is the first year without the built-in bump up in assessed values from the full value phase-in exemption. The last 3 years, the village experienced increases that enable keeping tax rates flat. So the last 2 years, we had flat tax rates, which was very good. And this year, we do not have that bump up because the exemption was phased out. So the village of the town of Greenberg keeps us informed of the assessment figures as they change due to grievances. Currently, the new roll increased by 1.7%. It was more than I really thought we were going to get. That's $33 million. That means that essentially the village could raise the tax levy by $250,000, and the tax rate would remain the same. Now, with 100% assessment, that analysis is not as valuable as it was in the past. I'll let Larry jump in anytime you'd like to add anything. Of this increase, only 57% is due to physical increase. That's where you had additional building activity. 30% is due to increased values that are subject to the market. So if they were turned down in values, the village could experience a significant decrease that would adversely impact the tax rate.
So one of the things on this is, you know, and we touched on it a little bit last year, but remember, this is all fairly new to all of us because we probably weren't around in this village when the last revaluation was done. So they continue, most of us, so they continue to update the values on a rolling basis, on a statistical basis. They'll do a full village and town-wide revaluation every so often, but on an annual basis, they make adjustments as they see trends in the market. So theoretically, if there wasn't a single bit of new construction or modifications to any buildings in this village, and yet the market values rose by 2%, does that mean that you should have the ability to tax your residents an extra 2%? The answer is, well, you can do whatever you want, but the answer is really that, well, everyone's assessment's gone up by 2%, so if you increase your levy, they're going to have it may look like a 0% tax rate increase, but everyone's tax bills will be going up.
Yep.
Well, aren't we getting that in effect with the bump ups the last couple of years?
No, because they've been related to exemptions and changes in the exemptions as a result of the phase-in that phased out, you know, as well as some new construction. And there were some value changes, but it hadn't really been broken out for us. We asked now and did last year.
The first time that we're just getting solely a value change and a physical.
Right, we asked for that breakout because I think it's useful information for you to know, certainly. So, so even though you see an increase in assessed value, you know, back in the old days, that meant, you know, truly new construction or modifications to buildings, and those people will pay more, of course, but not the people who haven't changed.
When assessed values never change.
Well, right, well, they wouldn't change unless you did something, right. So it's a different way of operating, but we just thought we'd highlight that, just to make sense.
And you could have a decrease.
Right, that's the
It's likely that there could be.
Sure, yeah, and we'll, yep.
Okay. So we still have a number of outstanding scars and small claims assessment review. So I provided a buffer in this budget to be conservative. They'll give us a final number on or about March 1st. Okay. Tax surcharges, settlements continue to be settled at a very organized rate. The current year, we have budgeted $150,000. We are within that amount. We just had a very large one come in for a judgment on Ardsley Country Club, which we anticipated. So we're doing well for this year, and Ed Lammers has given us a rundown of what's on the calendar, and $150,000 should be fine for next year, so there's no change there. Tax cap, the tax cap is at 1.78%. The max it would be is 2%, or which is the maximum. So it's under the max of 2%, and it's linked to the rate of inflation. The growth rate is 1.49. That's pretty good. There were some villages that had higher. There were certainly a lot that had lower. So combined, that would allow for a tax levy increase of $489,000. Okay, we also had a prior year carryover of $189,000. So we have available, without exceeding the cap, of over $600,000, $678 to be exact. I don't think we're going to be anywhere near that, but it just shows how much under the cap and how much we have available.
Can you explain growth rate? How does that differ than assessment increases?
They give you the allowance to increase it because your village has just grown by growth of physical growth.
By a black box.
Yeah.
Behind the magical number in the company.
Yeah, it's a little, we found this to be a little bit deceiving, but it's what the formula is. The number is, here's what it's intended to reflect. It's intended to reflect new construction, which presumably would mean new residents, which presumably would mean new services to those new residents. So they give you that little extra elbow room to be above the cap by that amount. So, hypothetically, if you had a building boom and you had a 10% increase in your population in 1 year, which of course wouldn't happen here, you should be able to increase your budget by 10% to respond to all the new residents. That's the concept of it. How it actually translates here, I can't explain how they get these numbers. There clearly is not a lot of new construction, but I think some of the renovations and expansions that are going on in some of the homes particularly get picked up as new construction and therefore get added into this formula. Honestly, you've not really pushed your cap limits. You haven't been pushing close to the cap limit in recent years, so you're really not exploiting that particular number. It's there if you need it, especially if there's other factors going on, but in terms of budget. But that's so. Is that? I'm sorry, it's not specific, but that's
Yeah, but
the
is that
intention.
on top of 1.78?
Yes.
Yes. There's a worksheet. If you go another couple of sheets,
Yeah.
turn the page. There's the calculation. Next page gives you the growth factor for this year, and then the next page gives you the other villages and their growth rates. You can use that for a little comparison. So it is good to know or to see that it will not be a challenge to us to keep within the mandate of 2%. That's what that's illustrating, simply. What I've already calculated into the budget, it reflects the police union salaries. In contingency, we have potential increases for staff and CSEA workers. The current CSEA contract expires on May 31st as under negotiation, and then have Social Security, which will increase proportionate to the salary increases. I'll report to you that the January increase for health insurance was nearly none. It was flat, basically. Amazing, it's very rare. We've had up to 10% increases some years. Basically, we did not have an increase on the January bill. So that will affect us, that will help us for the rest of this year. the current fiscal year we're in.
Why was that? Why was it flat this year?
I didn't pursue why, I didn't.
Joe?
But we get the rates from night shift. It has to do with, I guess, the experience of, the contributions. I think they did raise maybe some of the co-pays
Okay.
to help along, you know. So this is the New York State plan that we participated. So I think there are more contributions from those that participated. And we've had year-over-year increases that have been really high. So this year we have pretty much a reprieve from that. What I have budgeted, what we need to budget for though, is next January. It's January to May 2021. So for that, I put in an 8% increase. Interestingly though, because of that, flatness right now on the bill, we have actually a decrease over the various funds, not just general fund, but library, and sewer, of $46,000. So that's unusual, but that's how it is this year. Insurance, waiting for information. I've estimated a 3% increase at this point. The same with workers' comp. I haven't heard from them. Hear something in the next week or so. Again, I put in 3% as a buffer there. I have also good news on the retirement front, that the rates are only slightly higher. I guess it's the performance of the stock market. It's just decimals of a percent higher. So we have an increase to the village. It's really based because of salaries and that slight increase. It's $67,000 over last year. And that would be village-wide, sewer, water, library, general fund. Now we have our revenues, and the big news there is the increase in the Westchester County sales tax. That was implemented actually in August, so we're seeing the benefits of that right now. And it's projected that the village will see an increase just strictly due to that, when the projection was for $343,000, and the budget's been adjusted accordingly. So I think that's going to really offset a bulk of the expenditures really to a very large extent.
That's great.
Debt service, as you recall, we did permanent financing for our bands, which are our bond anticipation notes. So they're no longer in the operating funds. So it looks a little unusual that we had expenditures last year and will not happen this year, because all of that's reflected in the debt service fund. So it looks a little unusual when you see that, but the impact actually, because of the structuring, is a decrease in debt service of $47,000. So just to recap, at this point in time, where we are in the budget process is we have the police, which are going to be presenting shortly. We have their requests in this budget, the changes that I've gone through already. And if you combine that, it comes to a net increase in the levy of $117,000. Because really the numbers are so advantageous this year, we're talking about, gee, what can we do with this situation that the village can benefit by that, other than a lower tax rate, is perhaps accelerate our paving budget. We have recurring paving, which we're planning to do, instead of borrowing for it, to have it as an operating fund. So
That's such a sexy way to spend.
No, but it's not, it's actually, I know, it's a little deceiving to say that we're accelerating.
Well, it's no, again, you can chime in.
We're accelerating, bringing it from our capital budget, where we have to borrow every year, over into the operating budget.
Right,
So-
we've been doing that.
Yeah, so instead of wait, we had 2 more years to continue to accelerate, we're just suggesting maybe we'll bring that in this year as a good year to do that,
That's a $60,000 item, basically.
instead of what would have been 30 if we had
So-
continued on.
We had the 30 in, we said, let's put the 60. And this is all flexible, we don't know
Yeah.
what the other departments will request. We thought, well, let's see what that looks like. And that's giving us an increase in the levy of $117,000. So we're starting off the budget process in an excellent position. And
Yeah, the next page has the tax rate summary, and that's the sideways schedule that you have here. This one here,
that one,
right?
the next page.
And so the rightmost column is where we are currently, having not heard any of the department budgets yet, but
Except police.
except police, so it reflects that. But it reflects a lot of this, as you heard from Brenda, reflects a lot of the significant items that we know about. Obviously, on a department-by-department basis, we'll be dealing with issues, but some of the larger issues are already reflected in here.
So it's nice to be out of the gate with a good position. Any questions on anything at this point?
Very good, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, so if, let me just start before the chief dives into all this. First of all, we're in the public safety tab, which I don't know what color it is, but it says public safety on it, so it's purple.
We don't have colors.
Okay. Oh, look at that, all right. Public safety. So, there's a summary page here on top with all of the various detail behind it. We can go through the detail tonight, but to start out with the summary, I think it's helpful to talk really about the one main item in this entire budget, which, as you can imagine, is salaries. And there's a few moving parts with salaries, and Brenda and the chief and lieutenant and I spent a fair amount of time today talking about some of the comings and goings and some of the decisions that have been made or still need to be made in terms of personnel. Again, not talking about specific people, but just positions. So, as you can see from the very top line here, salaries, the increase in salaries is just a little over $85,000. What's shown at the bottom, in the middle of the page below that, is a breakout of the ins and outs of what makes up that $85,000. So, $134,000 is attributed specifically to contractual raises. So the contracts that was settled and applied to the current salaries yields that. There were 2 recruits hired in the last year since last year's budget. So last year's budget included full top grade police officer salaries who retired and were replaced by recruit grade, and grade 5 salaries. So what the net savings from just that one transaction of the 2 individuals is a little over $120,000 in savings. So
That's the difference in salaries.
yes.
So that's a recurring?
Well, it
will start to narrow.
It'll start to narrow,
But
yeah.
there'll still be this large number
Yeah.
going forward for quite a while.
Yes. But again, since we budget year to year, the
Right.
budget's going to be budgeted reflecting today, so next year you'll actually have little steps, going higher.
Yeah,
But in terms of the entire,
Yeah.
I refer to it as a transaction. It's probably not fair from an employee standpoint, but in terms of the entire hiring process for those 2 individuals, there's a lifetime savings of coming in at step 5 and progressing to step 1.
which
And
was
that's
the point.
Yes, exactly.
You also had a sergeant position that retired also, which was a
Yeah, but we did promote, yeah, we did in that case, right, and we'll get to that in a second. So then the next decision-making process, which I know the board has already gone through, and you just took care of it tonight, is the creation of the second lieutenant's position. And the second lieutenant would constitute an additional position in the department. So we would be adding effectively $149,000, which was the salary you approved tonight. Well, I'm sorry, the salary you approved plus an increase anticipated for June 1st, which is a kind of quasi-contractual. But because that person who was promoted will then be replaced with a recruit grade or lower level police officer, there is an offsetting savings. You're not bringing in a top grade experienced police officer, at least that's not the intention, certainly. So the next line below that, the new recruit associated with the, essentially replacing your promotion of lieutenant, is another $60,000 savings.
What's the time frame for that new recruit?
ASAP.
Yeah. Their names are being gathered, and, they're working through that.
So that's 60,000 against his, what was
Against his sergeant.
his previous salary?
Yes.
Do I know?
Yes. Which was sergeant, which was a sergeant pay, you're right. So, the last of the decisions, and this is where there needs to be a little bit of a discussion, is that currently there are, if I misstate anything, let me know, but if there currently are 16 officers, sergeants and/or officers in the patrol division, 8 of whom work at night and 8 of whom work during the day, essentially. They have 12-hour shifts. Out of those 8, or a total of 16, there are a total of 6 sergeants, 3 on day, 3 on night. And as a result of the way tours overlap with the 12-hour tour and the various 15-day schedule that they work, it's a complicated thing, but the Lieutenant Morano and the Chief analyzed it for me, and we effectively have about 10 out of those 15 days where there are actually 2 sergeants working on the same tour, which is not necessary. And again, I know the Chief would rather have lots of sergeants, but I think we certainly understand and respect the fact that, you need supervision on the tour, but you don't need multiple sergeants working at the same time. So the proposal currently is for the lieutenant that you just promoted, the sergeant position that's now open that he occupied, that not be filled with a sergeant. What that'll do is that'll leave, that's the day tour, right?
Right.
So that'll leave the day tour with 2 sergeants and the remainder police officers, and it will result in 2 out of the 15 days where there's no sergeant working. In which case, so there'll be 3 police officers instead of a sergeant and 2 police officers. And in those instances, the contract provides for out-of-title pay for the senior police officer to step up and be the supervisor on the tour. That's a standard provision in the contract. So while there will be a little bit of extra, bump up for a sergeant out-of-title pay, the savings, the net savings that we see is the 18,000 that's shown on here, and we think that's a wise move to consider.
And on those days when there's no sergeant, we can make sure that there's a senior patrol
Yeah, it'll be the day
officer
tour.
who's senior enough that,
But you also
because
have,
we have an awful number of young, we have a lot of.
you also have myself and the lieutenant working day tours too, so there'll be still supervision overseeing.
That's the other overriding factors that you do have as a mitigation. Not that they're going to necessarily sit at the
Right,
desk, but
exactly.
they're here.
Supervision is-
Right. So that's the way it's structured now, that's the ins and outs of personnel. So I don't know if there's any questions in terms of, again, the only real decision is the decision to promote or not promote a sergeant at this point. And again, this proposal is to not do that. All right? Okay.
That sounds good.
And there's no requirement that we have to have a certain number of sergeants or something.
No. Yeah, staffing, not to get too technical into the union's labor relations items, staffing is management's prerogative. Of course, you can't do it in a way that somehow is unsafe. We can't say, well, sorry, only one person working a tour, and, there's, issues like that could be challenged. There's no question in our mind that this is not a safety issue, and again, the contract even provides for this type of a situation when there isn't a sergeant set to work a slot. So, okay.
Sounds good.
So probably, it might be easier to flip over to the detailed schedules a little bit, because I think it's worth talking about, certainly it is worth talking about the other nut of personnel, which is overtime. We have this conversation every year, it seems like. Yeah. So,
We can go back to that previous page, though, right?
oh yeah, well, you can go back to it, but I just want to, I want to just tee this up, and then the chief can comment about kind of everything that's gone on during this year to lead to these numbers. But to give you a little roadmap here, so about halfway down on that first page, that budget preparation report page, there's a line item 3120.101, which is personal services overtime. And the columns here, about the third column over, 287,500, that was actually the adopted budget. The budget has been modified, adjusted throughout the year. Brenda brings those adjustments to you all the time. So the budget is now 591,000, and we'll certainly explain why that's the case. We currently have spent, as of today, 646,000. So
that's quite a difference.
It's a difference, yeah, and we're going to talk about the reasons why and where we got and where we are. Our projections from here through the end of the year, absent any additional injuries or anything unforeseen, would be for an overtime budget of overtime actual expenditures of 750,000 total. So obviously that's a little bit over 150,000 over what the adjusted budget is. So, Chief, if you want to go through step by step, there's certainly reasons that you'll recognize and others maybe not, but.
A large part of the increase is we've had 2 retirements, which created a big hole in the schedule, and we had also had 2 individuals that were out on injuries, which brought us down almost 20 to 25% complement of manpower. The hiring of the 2 new officers, again, they had to go through training, a 6-month training period, which again created additional overtime. Sick time was another issue involved. Not that it was out of proportion on an average, but it still has an effect on the schedule. And then you get into the summer months with vacation time and all of that, it just surmounts and left us with a lot of holes in the scheduling this year.
The one thing I should say is that, if you recall, in recent hirings, there was a conscious decision by you all to replace the 2 retirees back last spring with new recruits. We had contract terms that we thought were advantageous and made sense to encourage hiring at the lowest levels possible. The problem with the timing on that is that although you'll see long-term savings, or at least medium-term savings, while they're still working their way up to first-grade police officer, you have near-term staffing issues. So, and those staffing issues, by the way, were large the entire summer, and which is when you have the highest demand for overtime and absences for vacations and such. So, the timing of the school is that the school is run from late July until December. And when they get here, they're still not ready to work on their own. So, but, within a few weeks or so, they're ready to work on their own. So
we're finishing up that now.
So, that's right. So, there's field training and such. So, it's the better part of 9 to 10 months without those 2 individuals who retired. So, an example now is you might make a different decision this time around when you now have a need to fill a position as a result of the promotion to 2nd lieutenant. The school still doesn't start until July, and of course we wouldn't be with an officer to replace this promotion until the end of 2020, which we think is just a bit much to ask in terms of absorbing in terms of overtime. So it's certainly an option, but I think if we can find a lower level transfer, again, sticking to down within the grade 5, which is the lowest level, grade 4, grade 5, somewhere in that range, we can still achieve a significant amount of savings without having to wait until the end of this, 2020. So that's the thought process right
So
now.
a couple of questions. One is, prior to the last two hires at the very lowest base, my recollection is at least 2 or 3 hires that were transfers had relatively higher numbers.
Yes.
That were moving up pretty quickly to the max numbers.
Yes. Including one right at the top, as a matter of fact. Very experienced.
So that's one comment, just in general.
Yeah.
The second comment is, so if the overtime numbers are, close to 700,000 this year, and last year were 658,000.
Right.
Why are we budgeting 296,000?
Right, no, it's certainly a reasonable question, but here's the part that is the inconsistent part and the part that we can't predict from year to year. So when there is outside work, like traffic control for Con Edison, which happened last year and happened again this year, last year on Main Street, this year on South Buckout Street in West Clinton, there's a significant amount, very significant amount of overtime that's incurred, all of which is...
Excess of 6 figures.
Yeah, all of which is reimbursed. Right, so when it's reimbursed, the adjusted budget is adjusted upwards to reflect that, so the level rises on both sides.
So how much of this 700,000 this year is reimbursable, money versus?
Well, so out of right now the budget, the adjusted budget is at 591. That reflects all of the reimbursements that we've received from either Con Edison, or also when there's an injured officer, we receive workers' compensation benefits, which are only a fraction of what their salary is, but it's still reimbursement. And it also reflects a transfer of about 185,000.
That's tonight's agenda.
So 185,000 of this number, of this 591, is directly from the full-time salary line, because we didn't use those 2 full-time salaries while the recruits were in school. And, a portion of their salary, and actually a portion when they weren't even working here. So there's 185,000 of savings directly attributed to us waiting for those recruits. So that offsets, a portion of the overtime. So if you eliminate the 185, the balance of the change from 287 to 591 that is reimbursables. The amount that we're exceeding even that budget is for all of the injuries and illnesses that the department's had, and I think we've documented a couple of them to you in private session. And again, waiting for this.
I have one more check coming in, a large one, I anticipate for work.
So these numbers are fluctuating, but that's, the 150,000 is really the amount by which we project to be over budget when this year is done. And we attribute a large percentage of that to the difficulties that we had with injuries and then also waiting for the recruits.
So I guess my bottom line question is, I remember last year, we went to rec and said, you've been running these numbers that just don't add up every single year.
Yep.
And let's, draw the line and make them add up.
Right.
Are you comfortable that this is adding up? Are you, whoever?
No,
Yeah, no.
I'm not comfortable, but it is the way it is, and I don't know, it's very difficult.
We're getting reimbursed for everything except for the salary offsets for taking recruit level new personnel, which is the 185K.
Right.
But everything else that, if I'm hearing it correctly, everything else that's above budget is directly related to reimbursable income or insurance income. Is that?
The Con Edison reimbursements, for example, I'm using Con Edison because they're the biggest one. Those cover salaries 100% and then some, benefits and everything. What doesn't cover are the injuries, where we do get some reimbursement from workers' comp, but not nearly enough.
It's not 100%.
No, and that's on the injuries. Then we also have longer-term illnesses.
Yes.
that we're also dealing with, and those
There's no
are not
reimbursement.
reimbursable anywhere. So, no, right, no, you can't. So I think what we're saying, and the reason the budget is proposed the way it is that, yeah,
No, that was me.
the reason we're proposing it this way is that we feel that the budget would have been adequate, and there is another 25,000 in contingency that was kind of there as fluctuating, so, but with all of that, we think the budget would have been adequate had there not been the various things we just talked about. Will those various things happen again in the upcoming year? I mean, you know, we hope not, but we certainly are doing the best we can to manage it.
Well, I mean, just devil's advocate, and, you know, I know these things are all, I'm crossing out the Con Ed thing, because that's, you know, essentially a
Those are one for
one-for-one
one,
here.
yeah.
But the other kinds of things, do we have, looking back over the last 5 years, is there a rolling average? I mean, is there something that, or is it just really total dice roll, you just never know?
The
You know, it has a
long-term-
certain size department, you'd expect conceivably a certain injury rate. I mean, I don't know, I'm not an insurance actuary type
Right.
person, so,
Yeah, our injury history has not been bad.
yeah.
This year hasn't been terrible either, but the timing was the worst. We had an injury in the beginning of August. That's the worst possible time when staffing is at a minimum, basically. So, and it ended up being fairly long-term and through the fall. We had an illness that extended for a good portion of the year, as you know, so the timing of it was bad. I wouldn't say that statistically it was extraordinary, it was just bad timing.
Well, I guess I'm just trying to get back, it's not really a criticism or anything else, it just, I'm back to what Larry is saying, which is, should we be adding more in just because we're under-expecting? Whatever, I don't know the right way to phrase it, but, you know.
Yeah, no, we were dealing in past years, as Larry mentioned, we were dealing.
We also had a lot of retirements too over the past 4 or 5 years too. A lot of departments changing over now, and it's gonna continue now. Obviously, most of the older guys are leaving, myself included, obviously. The past, I'd say 4 or 5 years, we had about almost 6 retirements, and thank God it's going that way instead of them all going at once, because that would leave more of an issue when we're dealing with it. So every couple of years now, every year we've had somebody retire, either 1 or 2 go at various different times of the year when they're ready to go. And that creates that issue of uncertainty that you never know when it's gonna happen. And they come in tomorrow and say, I'm leaving, so you can't even plan for it at that point.
Yeah, so that's another source of uncertainty then, yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, we're comfortable with this number here. Will it be adequate in all circumstances? Probably not. But I think that from a goal standpoint, it's for something to work towards, I think it's appropriate at this level. So, you know, could we put a little extra in contingency just to be sure? I guess we could argue that and talk about it, you know, during this process, but.
Manager coming in first.
See that, there's lots of,
Feeling
the
good.
world is your oyster.
After this report.
I think that conceivably it's worth cycling around and see if that makes sense, because
Yeah, okay. Fair
if
enough.
we've already used that contingent. we've
Well,
used
that hasn't been
25K.
pulled
No, that
out.
hasn't been put in there.
Yeah, we could actually, we
I
could.
could transfer that over, and then we have workers' comp money coming in.
Yeah, so that maybe the gap is a little less than
40,000.
150 or,
Yeah,
you know.
$140.
Yeah, okay. All right.
All right. Do you want to talk a little bit about equipment? We don't need to hit every single line item necessarily, but there's a change in equipment.
Is this the first hybrid or the second hybrid?
No, well, they should be coming in any day now. We got 3 hybrids coming in, 1 for the water department, 2 for the police
Well,
department.
I'm just thinking of the police department.
Yeah, so
They're not-
this will be the third one.
This is the third one?
Yeah.
Yay. Huh.
Well,
Oh, you don't have them yet?
No, they've been on order.
Yeah, we ordered.
They were supposed to come, at the beginning of January. Then we got word that they were in manufacturing around the 28th of January, so sooner the better.
We ordered it under the
Shared service.
the shared county contract, that when they bid that out, actually, it's almost a year ago that they bid that out. But we took advantage of that contract.
Good. like to start seeing how it starts saving on, gas usage.
Oh, sure, well,
Yeah, we can track that.
Should.
Yeah.
sure, I agree.
Well, especially on the idling too, not that they completely don't turn on, but they will be off a fair amount of time too, so, during the idling process. Yes?
Oh, no, I just started thinking about how the battery drain because of equipment load, so
yeah.
it's gonna be.
It'll be
it's gonna go
cycling on more
idling.
than
Yeah, what I've read on those vehicles, they have a good standing,
Yeah.
through all the manufacturing and even the police departments, so.
We'll see.
so,
But
yeah,
I can
it's
see
certainly
I can see the vehicle, cycling on more than like your Prius probably, because of the added electrical.
Unless you have air conditioning running while you're.
I'm sure they have larger batteries in these too.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but they just charge. They just have a larger traction battery, so it has a larger charge.
Yeah.
It's,
So we'll see.
whatever.
Do you want to cover the active shooter gear? On the equipment here.
Oh, on the equipment, active shooter gear, okay, yes, we needed to replace some of our helmets and some of our, I guess you want to call it riot gear or active shooter, emergency type gear. I requested through Counterterrorism Zone 3 to also assist some funding on that. And they've agreed to pay 50% of the funding for this gear, so if the village is willing to pay the other half, we can obtain the equipment of helmets, protective helmets, and additional supports for our vests.
So is that getting us some new things or just replacing
No.
outmoded things?
Replacing outmoding, because the stuff we had goes back many years.
No night vision.
No, I'd like to get that, but that in itself would probably cause most of the equipment we're purchasing now.
So what's going on with the line, the first line item on the next page that's got a 10, almost 11% increase? What's driving that? It just is generally listed as equipment.
No, you know what, that's a total from the
Right.
previous page.
Oh, I see, got it.
So, yeah, sorry.
Oh, so everything total is going up.
It's $6,000 on that line?
Yeah, the increase is total of 6,000, which is the 5,000 that
Brenda, what
you-
page are you in?
We're flipping to
Page 2.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the bottom of page 1 and into the top of page 2.
Right.
So the difference from year to year is $6,000. 5,000 of it is the active shooter gear that you just heard, and 1,000 something for the booking room.
Yeah, and the booking room is as a result of the new bail law,
Right.
discovery law. Obviously, the demand to turn over evidence and data that has to go to the DA's office, he can turn over to the defense attorney. It gives us like a 15-day notice in order to get that. That's why I also need the role of the second lieutenant to oversee all of this stuff too. And that's part of it. I also need the equipment to create another workstation so that this can be done very quickly and only have that one database to control. The district attorney has created a portal for us to work through, which also speeds up some of the process too. It's definitely something that we weren't planning on, and I'm, in all honesty, not really pleased with this normally either. And I'm sure a lot of you people realize what's going on with it. A lot of issues with it, so this is doing
So
something.
is that the only real increase in this budget from this new law,
And then I also have the cell phones.
The cell
It's
phones
under
is
shared
also
service. I was
an
gonna
issue.
come up with that.
Well, before we go off this block, so these increases are not, some of these fall out next year because they've been taken care of, I assume. You're not gonna buy another workstation,
Correct.
you're not gonna necessarily buy
Yes.
another hybrid vehicle, you
Yeah.
might.
Mhm.
Active shooter gear will have been updated and
Right.
you're not, so,
That's right.
The hybrids every year, though.
Yeah, they'd be one every year.
okay.
Yeah.
That's just a matter of replacing the.
Yeah. Okay. I just didn't remember what the frequency of replacement was.
So
Okay.
but to answer your question, so the answer, the short answer is yes, from these contractual line items, yes. We know that there's going to be a portion of some of the staffing that's going to be devoted to this. And certainly you helped address some of that with your promotion to second lieutenant. I realize there's a dual purpose for that in terms of, replacement in the chief's retirement, but, there will be a portion of that time devoted to it. How much of it is, we're not certain, and we're going to be relying on the managers of the department to get a handle on this. For example, we don't yet have body cams implemented. The expectation is that we will have them implemented, and when they are, there's a whole level of discovery that, this workstation will be in overdrive when that happens. So there's a whole level of things that will get introduced as we progress in the department.
Did we authorize, or did we put aside body cam money already in the budget?
There's been some money for body cams, but we received a federal grant for
That's what I was wondering.
for the actual equipment part of it, but actually the more significant part is the maintenance and
The data.
What about storage? Right, yeah, that's what I was thinking.
The equipment is nothing really, when you look at it.
No, it's all the disk storage.
Yeah.
So I guess, just, because I was just looking at where the numbers are big, in the detective supplies and Lexis Research, we have a 34% jump, so how?
It was a reclass.
Oh, that was reclassed, yeah.
Oh, okay, I got it.
It's $1,200 difference, it was reclassed from another line.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's not real,
So that's why the summary is good, the first page, it gives each of the net increases and why.
Well, so, I'm gonna go back to the summary.
While you're doing that, I'll add that we've added to our shared services line where we have costs for cell phones. So I put in the requirement, I think you said it was 8 cell phones.
Yes,
That will be needed for each of the patrol cars. That comes to about $6,000 for the year. So that's in this budget already.
Where,
Shared services is not within the police department, so there are other telephones. So I just wanted to
Because you
let
have
you
one
know that,
contract.
right. That's in the phone line.
And to the body cam maintenance in this budget too.
Yes, it is. It's one of the contracts that's in the maintenance
should
contract.
Brooke throw it out? So just going back to the summary sheet, the first one, I see the crossing guard, that's a new crossing guard? The
No.
889, or is that?
I think that's an increase in
I think that was the increase in salary that you
Last
approved
year, right.
back in June of last year, so.
Oh, so it's not an additional
No.
number of
Which is
hours?
good. If anybody's listening out there, we could use more crossing guards.
Right. But what's setting that? We're setting that.
Yes.
And what's the price of a crossing guard?
The current rate's about $25.
25 plus.
25 an hour, but it's
Okay, 2 hour.
It's
it's
split.
essentially 2 hours in the morning, 2
2
hours in the afternoon. So
Right, you gave us that number last year, I think.
yeah,
when we
it's a
talked.
it's a tough position to fill, just because of
The hours.
the logistics of when you're working, yeah. Anything else that sticks out? So
So, well, it's $100 a day is what you're saying.
essentially, about that, yeah.
Yeah,
That's right.
What are you interested in?
Only on school days. And when it's 5 below.
When it's raining, and when it's snowing.
Is that true?
100%.
You know, I was just thinking about, because we always have people talking about, the traffic committee's always talking about, how additional crossing guard support in certain locations might increase safety. That's all.
Well, I agree, but again, I've had an ad out for crossing guards, and can't find it.
Really?
Yeah. No, it's a tough position to fill. Usually you get a retired person that has a few hours in the morning that they could spend on a few hours in the afternoon, or a parent that's looking for a part-time job while the kids are in school. That's the kind of people looking for it. We can't find anybody locally that's looking, because you're better off living in town. You're not gonna want to travel to get you to do the job.
What do you currently have in terms of crossings?
I was going to give you some intro, because that's in your pamphlet, it's in your folder here. If you go to the salaries,
Oh, I see.
actually it pays $28.78 per hour. It's a total of 400 hours during the school year, so the person makes a little over $11,500.
Which page are you on? I'm sorry.
I'm not sure I include that, it'll be after the budget,
Okay, well,
you have a salary, have a worksheet of how I got.
So it's about,
yeah.
did you say 11,000 what?
At 11,500, so the person that does the crossing guard for one, let's say, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the
It's in
afternoon.
here, actually.
Yeah, it is. It's
Right.
microscopic, but it's
This
here.
last page?
Yeah.
Right.
That's right.
Has the breakout.
Oh, I didn't get to that last page, so there you go. Okay. It's microscopic.
Well,
Well, I wanted it all on one page.
just calling it like it is.
Save and pay.
Looks good to me.
So you see the crossing guards, it's in the middle, kind of in the middle there. So we have total of 3 crossing guards. One does 800 hours and the other 2 do 400 hours each.
Oh, right, yeah, the one crossing guard covers two
posts.
Right.
separate crossings, one at the high school, one at the Main Street School. So there's 4 different posts that you have covered. Okay. Thanks. So the question is, what other locations would be?
I'm not sure that a crossing guard would
Have
be
been talked
actually the
about.
appropriate one, but people have been talking about ways to try to manage cars versus the crosswalks on Main Street especially. So, equivalent to a crossing guard, but for cars to, get them to slow down in the mornings. Evenings is probably not a problem, everyone's coming up, but it's heard. I'm constantly getting complaints about the unsafe conditions especially in the morning rush hour, trying to get in and out of the side streets onto Main Street.
Yeah, but I don't know if I don't think that's a crossing guard.
It's probably not a crossing guard, it probably have to
Essentially
be some
directing traffic is what you're saying.
Yeah, essentially it'd have to be some enforcement activity.
Yeah, so that's, okay, well, I mean, if there's a specific proposal to discuss, we can discuss it here, or it can be done at a future time, but, I mean, I can't respond to a proposal that I'm hearing for the first time, but.
No, I don't think it's even a valid proposal, because it's really talking about the focus of tour activity, I guess, because I don't think you have part-time enforcement people, do you?
No.
No, not currently, no. Well, we do with some additional, with the officer that was doing it. When he's working, we have been able to put a traffic officer back in play as much as we possibly can. But it's difficult when we have other duties in the morning too to attend to. Our crossings, we need to cover those.
Yeah, I should point out that, at this point, and I know we've had these discussions before, that, the dedicated traffic post is not filled right now. And so, we expect that we'll be able to fill that once again, come later in the year.
When some other recruits get in?
Yeah, it really involves a long-term illness and ultimately a retirement. So,
Right.
so once that runs its course, then we'll have the ability to replace from below and move to the traffic post from up above, so, or from wherever.
Yeah. Right.
All right. I didn't think, just to add a point to that, we didn't think under the circumstances with all of the other issues that you heard about in terms of illnesses and injuries and all that, we didn't think it was appropriate to take yet another person out of the regular patrol and move them to the dedicated traffic officer position. It just, we understand the importance of it, but the magnitude of a gap that would have created would have been, we'd be having a different conversation right now, so.
Which we'll have after if there'll be a retirement from the prolonged illness?
Yeah. But we'll be ready for it, and we'll have, hopefully a replacement in short order.
Anything else?
Good.
Thanks, Chief.
That was the chief's last one, in case you're wondering.
Nice to have
Did I remind you of that?
You can come back.
I'm happy to say yes,
I think next year you
I'm
should-
also sad to say no, because
Next year you should come back and rip it apart.
my department is getting closer. And on that note, I want to thank you for your hard work, and I know it was a job making a decision between the two officers that applied for the lieutenant's position. They both were qualified members in my eyes. Fortunately, somebody gets appointed and one doesn't. I think the opportunity is there for the other officers to still come forward and be given the test for the lieutenant's position this October, and hopefully it may work out to everybody's advantage at that point. We'll just have to wait and see how it goes. But again, thank you for the support on the position.
Thank you. Thanks, Brenda. You know what?
We're not done yet.
I didn't want to, as I say, I got rid of my agenda.
Sorry about that.
Next up is reports of boards, standing committees, and officers. Trustee liaison reports.
I'm light tonight.
Okay, not gonna hold it against you. Tom?
Nothing from Joe today. I'll just mention that there is a farmer's market this Saturday scheduled, and I know that the CAB meeting will be on Tuesday, the 11th, 8 a.m. at the senior center.
I'll fill in for Connie on the water department. They replaced the highlights. They replaced the fire hydrant on North Hendrick Lane, which I'm not exactly sure where that is. And they cleaned a spillway at Halsey Pond, which I do know where that is. Anyone know where North Hendrick Lane?
Yeah, it's at the edge of South
All
Buckout.
the way down. No, it's not, it becomes,
Don't you just go all the way to the
it's
end of South
got a different
Buckout?
name.
No, but I mean, you just
That's
go.
where you go.
Half
Yeah,
Moon
you
Lane.
are walking
Isn't
towards.
it off of
Yeah.
Half Moon?
Right, Half Moon.
Yeah, but you
Yeah,
just,
I know.
yeah, you drive down South Buckout, keep
Yeah.
going.
And there's
Yeah.
North and South Hendrick.
Okay. It's one of those,
It's like four.
No, they're both on the same side of the street.
Yeah, they're on the same
right.
side.
It goes back to the Civil War.
Well, no, it's north and, yeah, it's,
One's north,
one's north of the other.
Fair enough. The highway department repaired a drainage problem with Cedar Lawn Road, and they're still recycling Christmas trees, which I always appreciate how long that goes on. And it installed handicap ramp on West Clinton Avenue in the aqueducts, which I think is kind of cool. And they started spring cleanup already because the weather's so good. So it's I think that's a better predictor than the groundhog, actually.
Well, you read the article, the groundhog is only 37%.
Which is twice as good as most meteorologists. So.
Yeah, but you might as well flip a coin at that rate.
It'd be better flip it going.
For the village court, for the month from 1/1/23, virtually, as usual, the vast majority of the charges received and disposed were in vehicle and traffic, 51 received, 58 disposed. Total money collected and remitted to state controller, $9,137. The fire department apparatus is starting to go to RESCON for annual maintenance, and the fire chief is meeting with the police department on a critical incident plan, but that's in the beginning stages. We'll hear more about that. As always, many interesting things going on in the library. 2/9 Chris Barry Book Talk on the 65th New York Volunteer Infantry in the Civil War. That's from 2 to 4 p.m. Co-sponsored by the Historical Society and the library. And 2/13, 5:30 to 7 p.m. the Teen Tween Valentine's Day Cupcake Wars. So you can decorate and compete your cupcakes. And as always, just check irvingtonlibrary.org for a complete list of all of the programs.
A cupcake war. Do you throw them at each other?
No. I think it's a competition of design.
It's intellectual war.
Hopefully.
Village administrator's report?
Not be able to throw them.
So I just would want to draw your attention to the quarterly report that you received from Sustainable Westchester, which is the Westchester Power Program, which is also known as Community Choice Aggregation, which is...
Socialist.
Yeah, sort of. So the report, I mean, it's hard for me to analyze it, but in summary, what I can tell you is that the fixed price that we as a community agreed to adopt into for a default supplier in recent months, and actually as much as the last year or so, has been running higher than what the Con Ed variable rate is. So people probably are not saving any money on a monthly basis, but are spending a little bit extra on a monthly basis, maybe 10 or 15, or in this case, probably about $13, I think is what the last quarter was per month, a little bit higher. That's for green power, I know, but overall, for the program itself, you know, going back to inception, they're still in the positive. So overall, and the way the graphing looks, it's on a monthly basis, it has typically been higher variable rates than the fixed rate that we have. So again, it's something that if for people that want to monitor it, they can actively and easily switch out of the default supplier. You can switch over to Con Ed's variable rate if you choose to. In the long run, it looks like the rate will be, you know, similar to Con Ed's variable rate, maybe a little less, occasionally a little more.
It's great.
It's green, and you don't have to actively monitor it, which many people appreciate. I think there's many people who don't understand this. I'm probably partially included in that category. So, but many people don't have the time to monitor it and try to sift out between, you know, promotional rates and all the various advertising material that you receive. So, this is it's still a good effort, shared service effort, and you know, it's yielded good results over the years. Just not the last year. I think with energy prices being down as low as they are, it tends to lower the Con Ed variable rate. My observation. So,
Village Clerk Treasurer's report.
Nothing further tonight.
Village Attorney skipped out on us. Public comment, I don't believe there's any. Review of action items.
I don't think so.
Executive
session.
Adjourn to executive session regarding collective bargaining. If I get a second, all in favor? Aye.